Sunrise Daily. We're keeping our focus now on the World Teachers' Day. And of course, you know that Nigeria is part of the world and teachers are just as much in Nigeria today. I want to welcome you, Dr. Modupe Olateju, to help us understand what this day means for Nigeria and especially our teachers in our climes. Thank you for coming on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here this morning.
So we are at this point where the expectations are high, what teachers can do to help to revamp the education sector. In your view, how would you assess the role of our teachers today in our schools?
Thank you very much. I think that, as always, teachers remain one of the most critical, if not the most critical factor in nation building. I've been in many conversations and many debates about who is more important, the teacher or the healthcare worker. After all, the healthcare worker saves lives. But somebody has to train the healthcare worker, otherwise they can't do their job. So obviously, I'm in favor of the argument the teacher is the most important factor in nation development and in the sustenance of any nation and any people. And I think that in Nigeria, as in any other country of the world, exactly the same is true.
If I remember very clearly, item 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals will be education, as a matter of fact. And as you said, teachers have a critical role to play there. Where do we stand on that scale?
Well, globally, learning outcomes have been found to be a very effective measure, a very useful measure of assessing not just how well children perform, but more so how it is that the nation stands in terms of its development. And this is because there's such a close link between what children learn in school, their skills and their competencies and their knowledge, and what a nation needs in order to develop and to progress. I don't think there's any point rehashing the fact that Nigeria is not doing very well when it comes to learning outcomes. Particularly when we look at the cross-section of the masses, and I'm not talking of the elite schools, which are very few in number. I'm talking of the masses now. We're not doing very well at all. We do not currently participate in international tests of assessment, so it's somewhat difficult to assess where we are globally. But when we compare ourselves with ourselves, we realize that there is still a lot of work to be done. And we currently implement assessments, even in the organization that I work, we implement learning assessments to assess how children are doing at early grades. And the results are dismal. That's what I will say. The results are dismal.
Why do you think, because at a certain time, Nigeria used to rank quite high in terms of education. Now, we know that things have sort of deteriorated over time. If we're to look at the timelines and ask how, where, and why did we miss that mark?
Well, I think historians would probably trace the decline in education quality to the late 1960s, to the nationalization of our schools during the time of the military. So from the late 60s to the early 70s, many schools, private schools, mission schools, many schools were nationalized and quote unquote standardized. And so there was a sense in which, because Nigeria had come into oil money, therefore there was enough resourcing to be able to ensure that the government could take care of the schools. But we know that's not exactly what happened. And so a lot of mismanagement led to decline in quality. Mismanagement also caused a situation where teachers began to feel as though they needed to exit the system. That is, the good teachers. The same thing happened in the healthcare sector. So the good, the excellent, some of the excellent people that we had in healthcare actually exited the government system, at that time. And since then, it really has been a downward spiral.
Talking about the spiral, I mean, the best hands there are, everybody in society, from the public figures to the private individuals, were all taught by someone at one level or the other. But yet, we had that spiral. How do we get out of it? I'm not going to ask you what caused it, because, as you said, the historians will have to trace that. But how do we get out of that position?
So one of the things that is really important to see when it comes to teacher quality and obviously the effect on learning outcomes is the notion of accountability. And so a system that is not accountable to itself usually does not produce the sort of outcomes that you expect it to produce. It does not produce the sort of positive outcomes that you expect it to produce.
Hold your thought. Accountable to itself. How do you mean?
So, for example, where you have teachers who are in a government school but are not accountable to their head teacher. They're accountable to somebody at the Ministry of Education or maybe at the local government education authority who does not necessarily work in that school, who does not come to that school every day. You're going to have a problem. Because at the end of the day, you really do want teachers to be accountable to the person who is there every single day as their line manager. When you have a system that is not accountable to itself in terms of its resourcing, so how do we allocate our financial resources? How transparent are we about how we allocate resources to teachers, to teacher development, to infrastructure, capital projects, etc., then we will have a problem. So I think that the notion of the idea of trying to fix this is one that requires us to really reflect on how the education system itself works, and then we will have a trickle-down effect even to the teachers.
How do we as a country improve the standards of our teachers?
Well, there are a number of ways that you can improve teacher quality. The first is to consider the intake into the teaching profession. Who is actually coming into the teaching profession? In Nigeria today, and I studied education, so I can speak as one who knows. In Nigeria today, because of the system of cutoff marks and entry barriers into higher education, typically those that become teachers have scored the lowest marks. When you consider those that are going into university, those that are going to polytechnics, and those that are going to colleges of education. So most often they have scored the lowest marks. And that is very telling in terms of who actually comes into the teaching profession. But never mind, there are wonderful teachers in the system. The next question is, how do you develop their capacity? How do you build and train them and ensure that they have the skills to be able to do their work properly? Third is a condition of service. I think that if we stepped into many of our public schools today, we will not be happy at all to be teachers, because the conditions, wherein these teachers have to work is really very depressing. So I think that we have to look at all of these three elements very, very systematically as a country.
So does that imply that we really need to call a state of, teacher disaster in the country today, a state of emergency for them?
I think that we have actually reached the tipping point. I think we reached it a long time ago, actually. And right now we're in a bit of decline. And I know that sometimes the results of the WAEC examinations are quoted as an indicator of teacher quality. One might want to interrogate that a little bit, because we know that there are many ways to score marks in an examination. The reality is that today we are actually not just on the edge of the precipice, we've tipped over already. And that is why you would find that a number of states are beginning to introduce rather drastic measures, into trying to rectify, the teacher quality issue, because you can't give what you don't have. If as a teacher you don't want to be in the classroom, you don't love children, you don't love teaching, you don't have, maybe some people don't have the cognitive ability, then you can't expect that the children that you're teaching will have high learning outcomes.
What's the role of ICT in helping teachers to attain best standards?
ICT is a technology is a tool, and technology is a platform. Technology is meant to be used to make systems easier. There is still a role for teachers to know what they're supposed to do, to have what we call the pedagogical competencies, which simply means that they know how to teach and they understand how the teaching and the learning processes actually work.
In all of this, today's World Teachers' Day. How do we get the teacher, or what would we say to the teacher who's watching right now, to get them to go beyond the pressure around them, especially for the sake of the child?
What I would say is, think about your own children. Think about your own children, which you may have, and your own children whom you may want to have in the future. Think about the world today. Think about all the wonderful developments in the world. Think about robotics. Think about people are going into space. Think about medical advancements. And then think about your own child. And then ask yourself, how would I prepare my own child for this kind of future? And then, as a teacher, put in everything that you can, in spite of the hardship, in spite of the challenges of the system, put in everything you can into helping children to prepare for that future. Explore opportunities beyond those that are presented to you now. So the system may not be training you as much as possible, but thank God for technology. You can go on the internet and you can train yourself. So it's really unfortunate that I have to give this advice, but that's what I would say to the individual teacher. Of course, the advice I would give to the system leaders is very different.
That's a good place to let it rest. We must thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Dr. Modupe Olateju, education policy expert. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for your time.